Hello and welcome to the Sage 50 Cloud Accounts webinar, looking at our new version 27.0 release. My name's Tom, I'm one of the trainers here at Sage, and I'll be taking you through this session, which should last around an hour. And I'm also joined by my colleague Jackie, who's on hand to answer any questions that you may have. Before we get started, I'm just going to run you through a little bit of housekeeping as to how this session will work. So on screen at the top there, you can see your microphone has been muted automatically, and it will remain muted for the duration of the session. That doesn't mean that you can't send us your questions. You'll do so using that speech bubble on the right-hand side with the question mark in there. So click on that if you've got any questions whatsoever about what I cover in this session. Send those across to us and we'll be happy to answer those. And you can download a copy of the slides that I'm going to be going through by using that download a handout icon. So that's a copy of the slides as well as some useful links such as to our knowledge base articles that give you a little bit more detail as to some of the things I'm going to cover today. And if you want a closer look at any of the slides or any of the product demos that I'm doing today, click on that switch to full screen to do just that. It will switch this presentation to full screen and make things a little bit larger and clearer for you. So we'll have a little look at the agenda now.
Firstly, we'll be having a look at some improvements we've made when creating a new company. We'll then be having a look at some custom alerts that you can set up within your customers and suppliers. So how to set those up and also where they'll appear within the system. We'll then have a look at some improvements we've made to user management. We'll go through some changes to connected services, some Sage Drive improvements, and although it says on screen there it's a version 26 feature, it did come in the last build of version 26. So just in case it's not something you're aware of yet, we'll have a look at some supplier batch transaction attachments.
We're going to have a look now at some changes we've made to the new company setup screens, and the best way to do that is to show you how they used to look in version 26 and below, and then have a look at the new screens from version 27. So the old screens are showing up there now, but customer feedback told us that the company setup wasn't always that easy to follow. So we recognize that the options in the company screen could be improved to make that process easier and quicker. So now in version 27, when you choose to add a company, you'll be presented with 4 simple and clear options. Create, to create a new company in your software. Connect, to connect to an existing company, either on a drive on the machine you're working on or a network location. Restore, which allows you to restore a company from an existing backup. And also download, which allows you to access a company using remote data access. You're also able to now search the company list, which is particularly useful for accountants who may have a lot of different companies listed on their open company screen. Now let's take a closer look at how each of these work, starting with creating a new company. So I'm going to choose my first option here, so create. The software will tell me where it's going to create my new data and store that. I can change that if I wish. I'm going to click to continue. I then need to put in my company details. So the information you're entering in these screens is basically the same as you did on previous versions. It's just laid out in a much more simple and user-friendly way. I'm going to click Next, and it asks me my business type. Previous versions allowed you to load an XML saved from another set of data to show the business type. We've actually removed that functionality. So now you just choose what type of business you've got, then your financial year. It will confirm what your financial year start and end date are. When you're happy, click Next. It asks for your VAT registration number, your VAT scheme, and also your standard VAT rate. I'll click Next there. I select my base currency. And here I can choose my password, and this is for my manager account. So I need to make sure that my password and my confirm password both match. I choose a security question and enter my security answer. It gives me the summary. I choose create, and it will create that company data for me. So it's copying layouts, it will copy reports, it will create my data files for me. And when that's done, it's going to ask me to log in to my new set of company data. I'm now having a look at connecting to an existing company, and that can be on this machine or it can be in a network drive. So I've chosen connect. I can choose to browse to wherever my company data is located. In this instance, it's on my C drive of this machine in my 2021 folder in company.002. As I say, it may be in a network location. Choose to continue once you've selected the appropriate data. It will give you a summary of the company name. Choose connect and it will ask you to log in. We'll now have a look at restoring data from a backup. When you choose restore, it's going to ask you to browse to the location of your backup file. It will also, once you've browsed to the backup file, detail where that company data is going to be created, which you can change if you wish to do so. Once you click continue, that data will restore and you can log in as normal. And the last option is to download a company using remote access. Select the last option to download and choose continue. You'll need to know your Sage ID. You'll need to select the company that you want to access in the companies within the remote data access window, and then choose connect to download that company file. Click OK, and you'll be prompted to enter your Sage ID. And once logged in, simply select from the list of companies presented to download that data. And we'll be having a little bit more of a detailed look at using that download function to connect to Sage Drive data when we have a look at the connected services part of the webinar a little bit later on. So we're in our data now, be that we've created a new company or we've opened one by restoring, browsing to a network or accessing it remotely. So what we're able to do now is have a look at some of the new features we've implemented in version 27, starting with custom alerts, which are available in the Customers, Suppliers and Products module. So as a direct result of customer feedback, in fact, this was the most requested feature on our Sage City area, users are now able to create custom alerts in the Customers, Suppliers and Products modules. For example, should you wish to remind yourself or any of your other users to always use the correct delivery address for a customer who may have multiple delivery addresses set up, an alert can be created to remind you of that, which can appear either as a pop-up or embedded in the screen itself. So let's have a look at this in action. So I'm in my data here. You'll see I'm in my customers module. I'm going to select the appropriate customer, and within their record on the left hand side I've got a new alerts section. To add an alert I can choose new, and I can see that for customers I can display alerts in either invoices, quotes or sales orders, and I can also choose whether I want to see it as a pop-up or embedded in the window. So I've chosen here I want a pop-up in my invoices to say to always use the Reading delivery address. I save that in the record. I'll close that customer screen, and this time I'm going to go into invoices and credits and raise a new invoice. And as soon as I select this customer, because I ask for it to pop up, I get a pop-up that tells me to always use the Reading delivery address, and to clear that I have to click the Got It button. I'll close this now. I'll go back to my customer screen. I'm going to open up the same customer now and go back to alerts. This time I'm going to highlight the same alert, edit it and choose to have it embedded in the window instead, just to show you where that's going to show up. So back into invoices and credits, I'll choose the same customer again. And when I click OK, you can see that same alert is now showing embedded in the window in that bottom left. So that's how I've created or edited an alert. I'm just closing out of my invoice here. This time I'm in my suppliers. I'm going to open up a supplier, and much like my customers alerts, these work in the same way. So I'm going to choose new. I can choose only to display them in purchase order, so I don't have a choice there, but I can say that I want it as a pop-up message or to be embedded in that purchase order window itself. So I enter the alert that I want in here. When I'm happy with that, I click Save, close the supplier, and then when I raise a purchase order to that supplier record, so I click New and select that account. Again, it's telling me their new orders are only to be raised by Anne Francis. Product alerts are slightly different. So I'm going to go into my product record, into alerts, click on new, and here you can see these can appear in invoices, quotes, sales orders, and purchase orders. So they can go for both your customers and your suppliers. Again, it can appear as a pop-up message or embedded in the window, and you just enter whichever alert you want in, click save, and this time if I raised any of those items, so purchase order, sales order, invoice or quotation, when I choose that product, so it doesn't matter if there's any alerts set up on the relevant supplier or customer record, they'll still show up. But when I select the product, that product alert will also show up. If at any time you want to get rid of an alert from a record, simply open the record, go into alerts, open the alert, using edit and choose disable and save if you want to temporarily disable it, or you can highlight the alert and click on delete to delete it permanently. We'll now have a look at some changes and improvements we've made to the management of users of your Sage 50 Cloud Account software. User management is the new name for access rights. Using user management, you can manage all connected and non-connected users and advisors from within your software, meaning you can easily and efficiently control who has access to your software. When you create users, you'll now be able to assign them to one of the following categories. Standard users are like your current users, where access can be granted to them based on the different modules or functions within that module. You may want to restrict the access of a new user just to the roles they're going to be carrying out, for example, invoicing, and therefore restrict access to more sensitive information such as the bank and management reports, and you can still do that when you create new users. You may wish to open up your data to be accessed by your accountant or bookkeepers so that they can access that data. If you grant them remote access, they will be able to create additional bookkeeper or accountant users who will also be able to access your data. Finally, the administrator can be assigned to users who you want to have enhanced access. So their rights will be similar to that of the manager login, so they can create and amend user access rights apart from the manager login. So your manager login will remain the master login to your system. So historically, only the manager login was able to create new users, but from version 27, administrator users will also be able to do that. We'll touch on this again a little bit later on in terms of Sage Drive improvements, but the new user management area allows you to grant remote access through user management instead of the Sage Drive Management Center. That means it's easier to add users to online services, and it means you can access Sage ID from within the user's screen. Let's have a look at some of this in action. So I'm in my software again, and I'm going to go to Settings, then down to User Management, where I can see a list of users. Anyone who's got an active session, I'm also able to change my password there. I'm going to open up Users. I can see I'm logged in as manager and it's showing me there. So I'm going to choose New. I'm going to create a new standard user first. I've also got those options for accountant or bookkeeper and administrator. But as I say, I'm going to choose standard first, click continue. I create their username, and a new feature is this tick box of require password change at next login. We didn't actually used to force users to change their password once they'd logged in. With that tick box selected, the first time James logs in, it's going to prompt him to change his password from the one that I've created to him to one of his choice. I've clicked continue, and I can now start granting access to James. So I can go through. Firstly, I can choose to select all if I want him to have access to everything, or I can choose clear all, which puts him back to having access to nothing. From there, I can go through and say, yes, I want him to have access to customers, which also means he needs partial access to suppliers and bank accounts because they have shared functions. I've granted him full access to sales orders, bank accounts, nominal codes, and VAT. Again, some of those functions mean he needs partial access to departments. If I wanted to, and it was easier to do so if you needed access to most areas, I've selected select all, and I can deselect the few he doesn't need access to. When I click continue, this is where I can set them up for remote access with their Sage ID. I'll click continue here. It gives me a summary of that user, and I can click save. So I've now got my first standard user set up. I'm then going to choose new again. And this time I'm going to choose the second option. So I'm going to create an accountant or bookkeeper. So bearing in mind it grants access to my data and it allows them to set up other accountants and bookkeepers within this set of data. So again, I'm choosing to create that password and saying that I want them to change that when they first log in. Just like I did with James, I can select all, I can clear all, I can give access to as many or as few areas as I want. I want them to have remote access, I can add that in there. It gives me the summary for Holly, who I've set up as my accountant or bookkeeper. It's nice and clear at the top of that screen there, and I can click save. Lastly, I'm going to click new again, and this time I'm going to choose to create a new administrator. So they've got the same kind of level of access as manager has, and they can make changes to any of the accounts on there other than the manager account. So again, if I want to enable remote data access, I can do so. It gives me a summary of what I've done there and a save. So I've now got my new standard accountant and administrator logins. James is logging in here. He's put his password in that I gave him. He gets a message here that tells him he needs to change it. So James can then choose any password he wants. So it will prompt him, because I've selected that in his record, to change when he first logs in. We're going to have a look now at some improvements that have been brought in version 27 related to connected services. The biggest improvement we've made to connected services is that you now need one single Sage ID. So it's a transition from separate Sage IDs into one single Sage ID, meaning there's a single onboarding process for our customers who are new to Sage Drive, bank feeds, and invoice payments. The removal of the Sage Drive Management Center means that access is now granted via user management that we've just had a look at. It gives you the ability to pause syncing on Sage Drive. You can easily retrieve forgotten encryption passwords. And for accountants only, the ability to set up Sage Drive as a main site on Client Manager. So why do we encourage you to use Sage Drive? What are the benefits of that? Well, firstly, you retain all of the benefits and features from your desktop software, so you don't lose any functionality whatsoever. But it means that you can access your data anywhere where you've got an internet connection. So you don't physically have to be sat in the office to do your processing. If you've got an internet connection, you can access your data. It offers continuous data syncing, so that if you're working off-site and you're working in your data, it's still going to sync that data with your live. You can grant real-time access to your data for your accountant or bookkeeper, so you can allow them to dial into your Sage Drive data and view that in real time. You don't have to take a backup and send that to them. It offers secure logins and encrypted data. And new in version 27, it offers you the ability to retrieve forgotten passwords and also pause that syncing. You can see on screen now quite a simple diagram that demonstrates how Sage Drive works. So you've got the main site where you've got your Sage 50 accounts installed and you're processing there, and then you sync your data onto Sage Drive. What that then allows you to do is access that anywhere where you've got an internet connection. So you then allow remote users to access that data. All the while it will continually be syncing. So if you're working at the main site and somebody else is working on a remote site, that data will sync on the Sage Drive, so you're working on the same set. It also means that your accountant can be granted access to view that data at any time. So that's how Sage Drive very simply works. We'll have a look now at connected services for first-time users. So that's people who have not used bank feeds, invoice payments, or Sage Drive before. For those users, you'll be presented with interactive menus to help them get started with user management and connected services. So we'll have a little look at that in action now. I've edited the manager user. I'm in remote data access and I can choose get started now with the Sage ID. I choose continue and it tells me it needs to connect this company to my Sage ID. So I put a first name and surname in there and confirm I'm the right person. I then enter some company details. When I'm happy with the information I've got in there, I choose continue. It authenticates the information and asks me for my Sage ID, so the login for my Sage ID. So I put that email address in there. I choose continue. And to create my Sage ID account, it asks for my name, for me to create a password, and then to confirm that password, making sure I put the right one in. When I click register, it's then going to send me a code to the email address I specify. I put that code in there, choose continue, and it will run through. This may take a few minutes for yours to go through there while it sets up your services, and it shouldn't be too long before success. So your company is now connected. With my company now connected, I'm in my manager user and I'm going to choose allow remote data access. So setting myself up for Sage Drive. Put a tick in there and it's brought through the information that I've already entered. So it's got my first name, last name and email address. And that warning at the bottom is just telling me that those details were used to connect my company data to my Sage ID, so they can't be amended. That's fine. I'm going to click save there. Saves that user record. It then asks me to set up my remote data access by creating a passphrase and to confirm that passphrase. You'll see on the right hand side there's some security involved. So you need a capital letter, a lowercase letter, and a minimum of 15 characters. I can then choose to upload my data. So I click that. A remote data access will start running through. So I can see the progress bar on that. Keeps going through. It tells me it's saving the user record, and once it's complete, I can see the Sage ID against that user in my user list. Now I've got that Sage ID set up. If I go into my bank module and into bank feeds, I can see that it's let me straight in there. It's using the same Sage ID information to access bank feeds. And similarly, if I close out of bank feeds and then go up to invoice payments, it's using the same details for my invoice payments as well. Now we'll have a look how you can create a new user for a company that's already using connected services. So I'm in my company data now and I'm in user management. I'm going to choose new. This time I'm going to create a standard user and click continue. I need to put in their name as well as their password. This time I'm not going to say that they have to change the next login, but do remember that is a new feature in version 27. I'll click continue, and here I can grant access to the various parts of the program as we saw earlier. When I'm happy with that, I'm going to choose continue and select allow remote data access. So here I need to put in the user details, so their first name, their last name, and their email address. When I know those are correct, I click continue. It will give me a summary including their Sage ID taken from their email address. I can choose save and it will save that user. And you can then see that they are selected on the screen with their Sage ID. They've been emailed telling them they've been invited to work in a Sage 50 company. They can follow the instructions on that email. They open up Sage 50 Accounts version 27 and this time use the download function that we touched on earlier. Click on OK and it will ask them to sign in with their Sage ID. They choose continue here. They enter their name and then create a password to go with their Sage ID. And they'll click register, which will then send them a code to the email they specified. They fill in that code, click on continue, and they can then see the company available to download there. They'll need to confirm the passphrase. Once they do that, they should click continue and then download. The company will then download, so it will copy the layouts, the reports, and create data files just as it would if you created a new company locally on the machine. And once that process is complete, you're then able to log into the new company because it will be available on the company list. So we can see that there. We open the company, the new user logs on, clicks OK, and it will then prompt to sign in with the Sage ID because this is the first time they're using this remotely. They put their Sage ID in. It will request their password. They choose to log in there. And once that login information has been entered correctly, the software opens and they're ready to use it as normal. If you've used these features in the past and you've installed version 27 as an upgrade, we're going to have a look at that upgrade process now. So I've installed my version 27 software and I'm going to open a company that I've previously uploaded on Sage Drive, and I get a message. It tells me as normal in an upgrade that the data was created in an earlier version of Sage 50 Accounts and needs to be updated, but it also tells me this data has been uploaded for remote data access, formerly Drive, and that's going to need to be updated as well. So to get that process going, I'm going to click on OK. And when I do that, it should ask me to log in with my Sage ID. So I'll put the email address in there. And then I'm going to click on continue where I'll be prompted for my password. So I'll put the password in there. I'll choose to log in. I'll just click yes to this message here. And then the data is going to be converted from version 26 to version 27 as normal. So that should just run through. So that conversion's done. We've got no problems on our data, so that's great. I'm going to close out the check data process that runs as part of the upgrade, and we then get another message. So it's telling me that I've upgraded to the latest version of Sage 50 Accounts, but also because we've made some improvements, we're going to need to upload new copies of the data to remote data access, formerly called Sage Drive. So I'm going to click on OK there, and that process will start. It'll run through there. I can log in, and that's my upgrade and transfer process done. When I'm in the company, you can now see where it used to say Sage Drive, it now says Remote Data Access at the bottom. Version 27 also comes with the ability to pause and resume remote data access, which is available in the Settings menu. You can choose to pause data sync for remote users, which is useful if you're an accountant who accesses a client's data on a quarterly basis. You can now pause the sync to prevent your system constantly syncing data to the cloud. When the user then comes to access the data again, they can either resume sync on opening the company, or it will automatically attempt to sync when the company is opened. This is not just for accountants. If you have users that use the program infrequently, this can also be a benefit for you. We'll have a look now at how live data sync can be paused and then resumed again. As you can see, I've opened my program and now I have a column for remote access. One of the companies is showing us online and the other is paused. So first we're going to have a look at how we can pause the sync on the data. Within settings, we now have the option for remote data access settings. In there you can see the option for pause live sync. Ticking that box stops updates from the main site while you're not using the company, and it can be resumed again at any point, which we'll have a look at next. So when you're logging into your Sage program, you can resume sync in two ways. One, by clicking on the ellipsis and selecting Resume Live Sync, which is useful for larger data sets because you can begin the sync in the morning so the data is ready to access in the afternoon. So the time taken to sync will depend on the size of the data. The second way is what I'm doing now, is just opening the company as normal. The program will need you to log in with your email address and remote access password, and once open, the data is being synced. You can then switch the pause data sync option off within settings and remote data access settings, which will mean that the data will constantly sync for you. You'll notice when this is unticked because the status of the company is changed to online. Another feature that's been added in version 27 based upon customer feedback is the ability to view the encryption password. So if you've used Sage Drive before on version 26 or below, you might be aware that using Sage Drive requires the creation of an encryption password or passphrase. You may also know that if this encryption is forgotten or it's not retrievable due to the member of staff who set this up not being available, then the solution was to disconnect Sage Drive and then re-upload the data, which could have been quite a lengthy process. So we've now added the ability to view this encryption password or passphrase when logged in as manager on the existing main and remote sites, therefore making it easier to add new remote users. If you're logged on as the manager on the main site or a pre-existing remote site, you'll be able to retrieve an encryption password if this has been forgotten. You can do this via Settings, Remote Data Access Settings, and here you'll see the option for Show Password or Passphrase. You'd have to confirm the manager login before it shows you that password, and you can then use that to add additional users to Sage Drive or Remote Access. Again, based on feedback from our customers and accountants, we've made further changes to the registrations that can access Sage Drive as a main site. Version 26 and below meant that accountants using Client Manager could only access their client's data as a remote user. We've made some changes to remove the restrictions around Client Manager being set up as a main site. So going forward, if you're a Client Manager user, you can upload data to Sage Drive and become a main site. The only caveat to this being that only data uploaded from Client Manager can be connected to a Client Manager remote site. This is going to enable accountant firms set up in this way so that their staff can work on accounts data from home, which is critical in the current climate. In version 27, we've also removed some legacy features. We know these features are used by very few of our customers, and we've engaged with customers before making any of these decisions. The features we've removed or Task Manager, the graph view of the nominal ledger, dashboard views, the phone dialer from within the system, process maps, and as I mentioned earlier, the ability to load a configuration XML when creating a new company. As I talked about earlier, the Management Center will be replaced with a user management feature, so it does the same tasks and more, and anyone using bank feeds and Sage Drive will be subject to the software lifecycle policy in version 24.2 and below. So anyone on one of those older versions will need to upgrade to continue to use bank feeds or Sage Drive. The last thing I'd like to talk to you about on this webinar isn't a version 27 feature. It actually came in version 26.3, but it's a feature that's really useful and I just want to make sure that you're all aware of it, and it's supplier batch transaction attachments. So when you're receiving electronic documents from your suppliers, or if you're creating electronic copies of printed items, you're now able to include those as attachments to your batch supplier transactions. You can then open the attachment to quickly refer to it while you're in your transaction screen or from the supplier record. So we'll have a look at this in action. So I'm in my suppliers module here, and I'm going to raise a new transaction onto the account Bronson Inc. I'm able to use supplier attachments on invoices and credits. I'm going to use an invoice. And to do so, I use this green plus sign in the attach column. So I click on that and you can see I can either drag and drop a file into that area or I can choose browse. So I'm going to browse to the location of my electronic document that I've received from my supplier, highlight and click on open. That's then put a copy of that document against this transaction, and I complete the rest of the batch supplier invoice window as I normally would. I can then choose to save and close that screen. If I then want to view that transaction along with the attachment against it, I can open up my supplier, go into activity, and use the paperclip to view the attachment. So I click on that paperclip, it brings me up that copy that I can view from there. Alternatively, I can open up my transactions module, find the relevant transaction, and choose view attachment at the top, which will only become active for transactions with attachments against them.